right. Well, we will get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brenda Schaefer-Pellinen with the Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging. By way of description, I am a Caucasian middle-aged woman with short auburn hair and wearing a cream sweater today. We'd like to welcome and thank you for joining us for today's session on creating your family legacy, values, stories, and connections. Before we get started, just some housekeeping items. We are excited to announce that today's webinar will be accessible to a wider audience. We have arranged for American Sign Language interpreters who will be present throughout the session. To access the interpretation feature, simply click on the interpretation button on the bottom of your screen. Additionally, we are also recording the session with ASL interpretation. These recordings will be available on our YouTube channel for later viewing. So whether you attend the live session or you catch up later, you'll have the opportunity to engage with the material in a way that suits your needs. I encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can keep up with our latest additions to our video library. We are always looking for suggestions for future topics. If you have suggestions for topics or speakers, please feel free to send those to my email, which I will put in the chat. Please keep your microphone set to mute. Just a note, if you experience any issues with bandwidth or the strength of your audio quality, it often helps to disable your camera. If you'd like, you can enter your first name, an organization, or community that you're from in the chat box, and what you hope to get out of today's session. If you have any questions during today's session, please feel free to enter your questions into the chat, and we will address those questions. If we don't have time to do all of them, we will do follow-up responses from our presenters via email to all registrants. At the close of today's session, you're going to see a quick session evaluation pop up. Please take a moment to complete that survey. It helps us greatly when planning future sessions. So a little bit about us here at the Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging. We are the Arrowhead Regional Development Commission and Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging are designated by the Minnesota Board on Aging as the Area Agency on Aging for the Planning and Service Area under the authority of the Title III of the Older Americans Act. The Area Agency on Aging, or Quad A as we like to call it, is committed to helping older adults maintain their highest level of independence. Area Agencies on Aging are regional organizations that provide services, supports, and information for just about everything that older adults and their families could need. The Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging's planning and service area includes the counties of Aiken, Carlton, Cook, Itasca, Couchiching, Lake, and St. Now I'm going to take just a moment to read our land acknowledgement. As we support our mission to help older adults maintain their highest level of independence, we do this while being respectful of the space we are being welcomed into by Indigenous people. We strive to deepen our understanding of the multiple ways in which people see and understand land and acknowledge the Indigenous people who have relationships with this land. We also acknowledge the decades of historical trauma, loss, and grief experienced by Indigenous people. It is our promise to not only recognize these truths, but also to take action to show our support of our Indigenous elders, neighbors, and friends, and understand our place within the past, present, and future of this land. We know this is just one step in recognizing and honoring the sovereignty of tribal nations. So we have a great group of presenters with us here today. Dr. Nicole Onori is an occupational therapist, assistant professor, and doctoral capstone coordinator in the Occupational Therapy Department at the College of St. Scholastica. She is a certified well coaches, health and well-being coach, life keys facilitator, and fellow at the Patient Revolution. Dr. Onori is the creator of the Legacy Appreciative Life Review and specializes in facilitating the life review process with individuals and groups ranging from emerging adults to elders. Her primary areas of interest include meaning making, the influence of meaningful living on well-being, and life review. She also serves as an advisory board member for the International Center for Life Story Innovations and Practice. We're so glad to have you here. Esther Gieschen has been involved in the field of reminiscence, life review, and life story work for many years. She has served as the program manager for the International Institute for Reminiscence and Life Review, where she developed and coordinated an online certificate in reminiscence and life story work. Esther became a certified guided autobiography instructor through the Buren Center for Autobiographical Studies in 2020, and she joins us today here from our region over in Barnum. Esther, welcome. And lastly, we are pleased to have one of our own on the presenter roster today. Jess Langer is an outreach and advocacy specialist with the Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging. Jess has been collaging, photographing, collecting mementos and stories, and scrapbooking for many years. And she is excited to share how family storybooks and scrapbooking can be a wonderful intergenerational activity for creating a family legacy. Jess, thank you for sharing your passion with us today. Thank you all for being here today. And I'm going to turn things over to Nicole to start out. Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Brenda. It's a pleasure to be here. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to talk to you about life review. We're going to be focusing on how life review can be a purposeful reflection for personal growth and healing at this stage of life, as well as earlier stages of life. This is one of my favorite topics, so I'm very excited to be here. You can advance the slide. All right, in order to just keep us focused on what we're doing today, I created some learning objectives for what I hope you walk away with, and that is the ability to describe the life review and its value in personal development, the benefits of what I call an appreciative mindset, and we'll get into that about midway through the presentation, and then we'll discuss the premise, purpose, and primary goals of the Legacy Appreciative Life Review, which is a very unique life review process that I've created. So I've left some time at the end of the session, about 5 minutes for questions. So hopefully I can answer any questions you have at that time. You can go ahead and advance. So what is life review and where did it come from? Okay, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of history. Back in 1963, there was a geriatric psychiatrist, Robert Butler, and he worked with a lot of elderly patients, and he just observed that a lot of people in the later stages of life tended to reminisce a lot and just take time to remember and review their lives. And at that point in time, in the 60s, it was really considered not a good thing. People look down upon it. And so what Butler did is he created a paradigm shift and said, hey, wait a minute, like this doesn't have to be a time of decline. Let's just shift the paradigm and think of life review and older age as a normal process with the potential for positive outcomes. So rather than thinking of, our later years as a declining time, he said it's a time of harvest, a time of celebration. And by doing this, since that time in the 60s, this is a field that has just really grown, the fields of life review and reminiscence. And there's a lot of literature just showing how beneficial it is to support positive mental health in our older years. And then coming to terms and acceptance, making meaning of our lives and acceptance that they were well lived. Okay, you can go ahead. I love this slide just because it depicts, I think how most people, from midlife on, they're looking at themselves and they're seeing their younger self because that's really who they are. It's who they've always been, and that's part of their story that they carry forward. And as I teach in the occupational therapy program, I really make it very explicit to my students that this is the case. Who you see before you may be a person who's had a stroke or illness or injury, but they are still a person with a life story and life history that you need to get to know. It's important to know who they are in order to provide the best therapy possible. Okay, move forward, please. All right, so I'm just going to briefly go over some of the distinctions between life review and reminiscence. And if you're a scholar in the field, there's some overlap, but for our purposes here today, this is how I'm going to define it. We'll start out with reminiscence, which is really considered it could be spontaneous or intentional. It could be selective or unselective, meaning you can select which memories you're going to think about, or you could just kind of be daydreaming and let different memories and thoughts come to you. You can have a purpose for it, being sharing it with others, or you can do it alone. But generally, it can be a fun and enjoyable activity, similar to scrapbooking, what we go through when we do that kind of process. But the interesting thing about reminiscence is that it can be, very self-focused. And that could be a negative or a positive thing, or it can be more of an impersonal, event-focused type of experience where maybe you're sharing remembrances of a birthday or a family gathering with others, or it can be a combination of those two things. The distinction between life review and reminiscence is that life review is evaluative, right? It's more of you're evaluating and assessing your life. You're trying to make meaning from the things that you've been through. It's more of an individual process, typically with a therapeutic listener, and it intentionally includes unresolved conflicts and difficult memories with the idea that you're going to work through those and what we call reintegrate them. How are we going to take those difficult things, make meaning, and make them part of our life story in a new way? And that's kind of what makes the process therapeutic, and helps people come to terms with things that may have been difficult and come to the acceptance that their life was well lived and perhaps make amends with people. So that's really the distinction, the evaluative component. And typically this is a very structured approach where you're working through your whole lifespan from childhood through older adulthood, whereas reminiscence might just be selective memories from different periods throughout your lifespan. Okay, you can go ahead. Before we move forward, I just want to give a little review of adult development so we kind of know where we're heading here. And some of the functions of the life review are to really help promote normal developmental milestones. And yes, adults have those as well as children. And in midlife, from about ages 40 to 65, the key points of development are generativity, and generativity is really being able to create a lasting legacy through your family, through your work achievements, or other contributions in the community. At work, that might look like mentoring younger colleagues, and that's a common thing that people like to do. They're desiring to give back to younger generations, the community, and society. And typically, this is a very satisfying experience. And so when you're able to do that, it's called being generative. If you're not able to do that, typically that's called stagnation. And so that's that feeling that life is meaningless. Maybe you're having a midlife crisis. That would be the typical way to think about of that sense of stagnation, not knowing who you are, feeling lost during the midlife. And so what we want to strive for is the generativity. Okay, continue. So as we move from midlife into later adulthood, of course, we want to bring that generativity forward, but we also want to develop what's called ego integrity. And that's that feeling that life was worth living, that you have minimal regrets, that you've made lasting contributions, and you're continuing to seek a fulfillment and satisfaction in your life. I just absolutely love this image of the 100-year-old man skydiving. I mean, it just really shows that growth and healing is a lifelong thing. We don't have to be limited in that way, and having that growth mindset is really important. On the opposite end, if you're not able to be generative and develop this sense of ego integrity, what often results is despair, regrets for what you have done or haven't done, being afraid of dying, and pondering the significance and meaning of one's life. So really, the life review is meant to help people through this process so that they can become and sustain generativity and ego integrity. So we want them to achieve those healthy developmental milestones because it's good, for health and wellness, as well as giving back to the community. Okay. So just an interesting note about generativity that people don't necessarily think about is that there's personal element to it and a communal or community element to it. You know, the personal element is that really it gives you a sense of meaning in life. Maybe it fulfills your purpose and you're creating your legacy. Many of you have probably heard of the term self-actualization, where you're gradually over your lifetime becoming who you were meant to be, fulfilling who you are, functioning at your best level. And that's kind of how I look at the personal element of generativity. But at the same time, you're giving back, you're being altruistic, expressing your care and concern for others. And I just think it's a really interesting combination or paradox. Something I read in the literature had said, you know, it's an interesting mix of narcissism and altruism. I don't like the word narcissism as it's typically intended, but maybe more self-focused would be a better way to describe it. But you know, contributing what you want to bring to the world, your gifts, while also helping others. So, okay, next slide. Okay, I'm gonna jump a little bit here to appreciative inquiry, because this is a key part of the program I've developed. And appreciative inquiry comes out of the organizational development world in the early 80s. And really, the whole framework is based upon, let's look at what we got. What are our assets and how can we build upon them, rather than what are we missing, right? And so this was very effective in the organizational development world, and then it's been pulled into the counseling and coaching worlds and career development worlds, and it's been very, very effective at helping people shift their life story and the way they look at it. That being said, we're not going to be shying away from the difficult memories and things like that. It's just going to be a different way of looking at them. Okay, you can forward. So just a little bit more about appreciative inquiry. Appreciative inquiry is about facilitating generativity and change, not positivity. Most people walk away thinking, oh, well, you know, we're looking at our assets and our strengths, which is true, but we're looking at those, you know, to disrupt the status quo, for growth purposes, right? It's using positive inquiry and questioning and reflection to shift how we're viewing things. And by doing that, we can intentionally appreciate our strengths and our ability to vision and think about possibilities. And that's kind of where I'm going with that appreciative mindset. And it really is a game changer. It's kind of like gratitude journaling, so to speak. In the appreciative inquiry process, they have something called the 5D cycle, and I've kind of reworked that, and I call it the 5R cycle, which is part of my legacy model. And that cycle is really reflecting, rediscovering, reimagining, redesigning, and reengaging. And that kind of encapsulates, I think, nicely the life review process at its best. Okay, go ahead and continue. So this is a large image of my model, the Legacy Appreciative Life Review. Legacy is an acronym. It stands for Life Experiences, Gifts, Aspirations, Contributions for Younger Generations. I call those the 6 core areas of the model. You'll see in the center, there's my legacy narrative, which is what I have people create, and that narrative is focused on their participation in life, their patterns of living, which could be habits, roles, routines, and rituals, as well as their life satisfaction. And encapsulating that, you'll see the whole concepts of being, doing, becoming, and belonging. And these are essential things that we need to be whole. So the way I define the appreciative life review is an intentional process that facilitates remembering positive and negative experiences in context, right? We want to look at all the context so that we can create appreciative and meaning-focused narratives, which facilitate well-being and adaptive responses. And adaptive responses is just a fancy name for coping and resilience and things like that. So what makes this different really is the appreciative inquiry piece. among other things. But each core area, when I take people through the life review, has 4 elements to it. So for example, the experiences core, we explore 4 elements. We look at what are someone's best experiences at each stage of life? What were their turning points and setbacks? What did they learn about themselves? What was their newly discovered strengths or values through those processes? And then walking away, what were the silver linings? What did they walk away with? Until we really stop and reflect, most of the time we kind of get stuck in a loop of thinking the same thing and not being able to draw some learning from it. So let's go to the next slide. So I think it helps just to kind of share a little bit about, my vision for this legacy life review process and the mission. And I think it encapsulates what I'm trying to achieve with the legacy life review, but also what we want to achieve with other life review and reminiscence processes. And that is really a life of meaning and mattering for all people. We all have that need to have a sense of meaning and fulfillment, as well as we want to be significant. We want to matter. And one of the things I really strive to help people understand is that regardless of their contributions, whether they're on a small scale or a large scale, that their lives matter. And in the legacy model, one of the cores is the contributions core. And in that, we take our contributions and look to the younger generations core, which is, to whom are we going to share our gifts with? Is that family and friends? Is it the community? Is it the nation and world? Or is it the nation, or is it the world? It could be a combination of any of those things, but most often people feel like their lives don't matter if they're just, helping their grandchildren and helping their children live a full life. But I like to try to debunk that and say that's very meaningful and significant. And sometimes we're affecting people on a global level and we don't know it. And so what I mean by that is, I lived in Rochester for over 30 years, and my ex-husband during that time gave over 100 pints of blood. And as I thought about that more, I thought, he probably had a global impact because we had so many international patients coming to Mayo. And it's just kind of nice to think about it that way. You just don't know the ripple effect you're having in your life. And I think it's important to remember that. So my mission really is to help facilitate healing narratives that can encourage and support people to live a purposeful, value-centered, and meaning-focused life so that they can enhance their well-being, their ability to participate in their life roles, and improve their life satisfaction. And I think the motto I've created kind of sums it up nicely. You want to live your values, experience meaning, but also share your gifts. And it kind of brings it all together. So, okay, we can go forward. So the premise behind my life review is a little bit different than the typical life review, which is for the older adult. The one I've created starts at the college age, and it's meant to be what we call an iterative process that you go through many times in your life. And the idea of that is, why wait until we're in midlife or older and do a life review or reminiscence and try to figure out how to cope with all this regret when we can be doing this throughout our lives and make what I call life course corrections. So whenever we're having significant transitions, we can pause and reflect and think, how am I going to move forward? What's the best way to move forward in a positive, healthy way? And so I'm pretty excited about that. I've done this with college students and people in their 20s, and they absolutely love it. Okay, next slide. So why the legacy life review, or why life review and reminiscence? Really, it's a process of personal growth, development, and healing. We know that many people have had very difficult life situations that they've gone through and have a lot of wounds. That being said, they also have a lot of positive experiences. And so how can we bring those together and develop that appreciative mindset, the capacity for visioning what we want for this stage of life and going forward, right? And so the life review, again, like I talked about earlier, we want to develop the resources we need, the coping, resilience, autonomy, all those things that we need for thriving. And we also want to facilitate the normal adult development milestones, whether that's generativity and or ego integrity, right? We want to be healthy. We want to live our best life. And by going through this process, I think, if you haven't identified your purpose or meaning in life, like those things can emerge through this life review process. And like I like to tell the students too, your purpose and meaning can change throughout your life, as can your values. Certain things come to the forefront at different stages of life. And oftentimes people are very relieved to hear that you can have multiple purposes and you can have meaning in more than in one thing. And life is dynamic and changing. And so, really, really want to facilitate successful participation in all life roles, whether that's parent, grandparents, volunteer, friend, aunt, uncle, worker, all the life roles that we have. And by doing all of this, we can really improve our well-being. There's a lot of literature showing how doing this can decrease depression, and improve quality of life and life satisfaction. So there's a lot of benefits to the life review. Next slide. So this is my last slide. I do have references on the next slide, but I like people to remember that, you're the author of your story, right? You have the power to say, this is not how my story is going to end. If any of you are familiar with Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, he says the one thing we really have control over is the way we're going to view something and how we respond to it. And that's part of the beauty of the life review and the appreciative life review. We can't say, oh, these things didn't happen to us, but we can look at them differently, try to derive what we learned, how we became stronger, and how we're going to use those experiences maybe to help ourselves or help others. So I'm available to do this. I do it with individuals, small groups, workshops, and retreats. And this is, like I said, not only applicable to the older population, but populations in general, people going through life transitions, suitable for intergenerational family experiences, as well as hospice, end of life, assisted living, or retirement communities. I've had a lot of interest from the substance use recovery counselors to use this process. So it's a powerful process. I think it's very fulfilling and worthwhile, and people tend to walk away with a better view of themselves. An interesting thing that I like to do, a lot of times you'll see people do kind of an exercise of writing your own obituary. I don't like to do that. So what I've kind of come up with toward the end of my retreats or workshops is I do a 100th birthday celebration. Whether we make it to 100 or not, we kind of want to look forward and say, okay, if I'm celebrating my 100th birthday, what is it? Who do I want to be there with me? And what is it exactly that we're celebrating? Like, who am I? What have I accomplished? What's important to me? And let's celebrate that. So that's kind of another way to shift the thinking from obituary to celebration, or memorial to celebration of life, so to speak. But that wraps up what I have to share. So I'm open to taking any questions.
Anyone has any questions, you can feel free to either take yourself off of mute or you can put those in the chat. We'll also have a little bit of time at the very end if you're still ruminating on all of the things that Nicole had to share with us. Please, there will be another opportunity as well. So. All right.
Thank you so much for listening.
I do have a question if I could ask. I'm not very good
Sure.
with the computer.
Go ahead, Marcia.
I'm just curious if you have ever if Nicole has ever worked with people who are very late diagnosed with neurodiversity, who are trying to not just sort through their lives, but resort through their lives for trying to understand how the neurodiversity, which is something that a person really can't control, but they're often judged very harshly all their lives. And so trying to sort through what is things that they're responsible or they owe apologies and what are things that they couldn't have changed it for their best efforts. How do you sort through something like that very late in life? And when you've tried your best and you've still gotten in trouble, for example, all your life. And so, just curious if she's ever worked with any of that kind of story.
Oh,
Appreciate it. It's a great program, and I'll shut up.
oh, thank you for your question, Marcia. Absolutely. This is becoming a more prominent thing that's being recognized, neurodiversity later in life. And certainly the whole process I described is meant to help people, come to terms with my life unfolded the way it was meant to be unfolded. I did the very best I could and let me come to terms with this. What do I need to do? Do I need to make apologies? How do I do that? Certainly, as an occupational therapist, I have the background as a therapist in mental health areas, neurodiversity, physical disabilities, and all those kinds of things to manage helping people through those challenges.
All right. Anyone else have any questions before we move on to our next presenter? All right. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you so
Well,
much.
welcome, Esther.
Thank you. I am unaccustomed to doing things online or with PowerPoint, so I don't have real sophisticated slides, but hopefully they will keep me on track. So, legacy letters are also known as ethical wills, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But my goals are to talk about what these are, what their value and benefits are, and how anybody can get started with them. So, the next slide, please. Um, the term legacy letters is broadly used to cover a variety of fairly short documents that convey life experiences, thoughts, emotions, lessons learned, values, and more to a specified individual, a specified group, or to a general unspecified audience. Ethical wills is kind of an older term, and my chair is squeaking for some reason. Um, that have the same purpose as legacy letters, but the term has kind of gotten out of use because it causes confusion with legal wills. And the term ethical has felt a little bit pompous and judgmental to people who maybe just wanted to express something close to their heart to someone they loved. The word legacy also adds a little confusion to it because it generally connotes something passed down from one generation to another. And many legacy letters are directed towards people's children or grandchildren, but not always. They can also be handed up to generations or they can be the same generation. Um, Sometimes letters are written to someone who is already deceased or even to a pet. Sometimes they're written to one's future self. Sometimes people write them when they're embarking on a long trip or a dangerous trip, or perhaps in the military, or maybe they're an astronaut, and they think that there's a possibility they might come back. And so they write a letter to their survivors on things that they wanted them to know. Several years ago, there was a story on NPR, and a proponent of legacy letters defined them as a written record of beliefs, values, advice, and how the writer would like to be remembered. But they're really not limited to that. And that's one of the really nice things about this particular area of life story work, is that it's really whatever the writer wants it to be and what it needs to be. They can sometimes be used as a way to explain someone's past actions. So maybe there was something that you want your kids to understand why you did, but you've never gotten around to, or it hasn't been comfortable, but you know it's going to be a question that they're going to ask. And so you can leave a legacy letter for them explaining that. They can also share lessons learned in the writer's life that they think would be helpful to others. And you see this in people who have gone through really, serious health conditions or life-defining events, and think that how they survive those might be helpful to someone else to do. They can be used generally to just express love, gratitude, remorse, admiration, appreciation, or other emotions that perhaps the writer didn't have a chance or the ability to express in person. They're not the same as an autobiography, a memoir, or personal history. Those are also all ways to tell one's life story. However, writing them can inspire longer, more detailed stories. I use them as in-class exercises in my guided autobiography classes to stimulate ideas for other stories. A person can just write these and file them away. They can be a dynamic document that you write and then you add to. You can do them by yourself or you can do them in a group. I do them in a group, and there's benefits for doing them in a group. You get to hear what other people's ideas are, and you may start to see how you look at your life differently. I do, if you're writing something and you're planning on leaving it for somebody or you're handing it on, sometimes it's helpful to have a trusted person look at it before the intended audience does, who can look at whether you are conveying the meaning and the sentiment and the tone that you want to. And if you read people's life stories or their autobiographies or their memoirs, sometimes you'll look at them and go, I wonder if they really thought about the impact that was going to have on the people who read it. And sometimes an objective outsider can say, is that what you mean? And if it is, that's fine. But it's helpful to think back on that a little. Next slide. So when shared, these letters can deepen the connections between the writer and the readers. They can mend fences, they can bring understanding, they can open communication. They can create opportunities for deeply meaningful conversations that otherwise might not happen. And some letters can bring great joy to the reader. Imagine getting a letter of gratitude from someone you knew long ago, describing and thanking you for something you did for them that changed your life for the better. And I had a participant in a group that I did who got a letter while the class was going on. It was an 8-week class, I guess. And it was from a student she had 40 years ago, telling her how what she learned from her when she was a student affected her life. And it was enough of an impact that 40 years later, she took the time to write a letter to this teacher. The process of writing, even just a part of one's life story, can give the writer clarity, can give a new perspective, perhaps greater objectivity, perhaps greater insight. As they reflect back, they may find that they can forgive now what they hadn't been able to before. They may come to see what they previously saw as a failure instead as a stepping stone to later successes. The process of expressing gratitude or forgiveness or remorse can be healing to the writer, even if the letter is never sent or received. Just the process of looking back on one's life, it's like a little mini life review. And Socrates is quoted by Plato as having said the unexamined life isn't worth living. And so doing legacy letters can be a way to examine one's life. So next slide. The biggest thing is getting started. And we tend to procrastinate and put these things off, like many of us do with our healthcare directives and our wills and other documents that people will be wanting. So it's never too early. They can be revised. They don't have to be cast in stone. Even if you send them, you can send an update. But it can be too late. And so the woman on public radio that I quoted earlier, she got involved in this because she had been trying to get her mother to do a letter, to write part of her life story so that it would be saved for her kids and her grandkids. And her mother died very suddenly and didn't have that done. So I encourage you that if there's messages you want to get to people, even if they're to yourself, now is the time to get started. It really can be very simple. It can be just like writing a letter to a friend or a family member or whatever. Those of us who grew up in the 50s and 60s, letter writing was a big part of our lives. So it's just like that. Take out a pen and paper and start writing. There are also a whole lot of templates available online. If you just do a simple search for legacy letters or ethical wills, you will get a zillion opinions on how to do them. My advice is to start simple, and one of the easiest things to do is a letter of gratitude. There are people in the lives of all of us who have had a huge impact, and they may not know the impact they had. Taking the time to sit down and think about what they did, when they did it, how they did it, what kind of impact it's had on you, will also help you in determining what your own values are and how you want to be remembered. Tribute letters are similar to gratitude letters, also can be done very simply and are a way to both give a message to someone else and to also help you look at what you value in yourself and other people. And in the next couple slides, I've got kind of some steps for those. But to look at how you want to be remembered. Think of your own beliefs and values, experiences you learned from, how you want other people to see those. Start writing them down. Take time for self-reflection. Think about who will be reading it and what you are writing and what impact you hope to have on them. There's a book that I don't know if this will show up or not, but I will try it. It's called The Essential Questions: Interview Your Family to Uncover Stories and Bridge Generations. It's written by Elizabeth Keating. And it's things that you might want to ask your parents or your grandparents before it's too late. And that's a good guide for thinking about what your kids and grandkids might wish they had asked you and might be things that you would want to include in your legacy letters. So if we go on to the next slide, a letter of gratitude is think of someone who helped you, who inspired you, who made a big difference in your life. You might think of lots of people, so start a list, putting it down, describe in detail what they did. Just sending a simple thank you letter is nice, but if you can tell a person specifically what it was, what they did, when they did it, what the circumstances were, how you were feeling before they did what they did, it makes it much more personal to them and more meaningful. And it helps you look at what you really value. Tell what the impact was on you of what they did, how you felt afterwards, how their actions changed you and your life, and then thank them again. Whatever you do, it's going to be appreciated and it's going to be valuable to you to write it. Just start writing. And the next slide is tribute letters. Think of someone you admire for a personal trait or an accomplishment. I had a woman that wrote a letter to her daughter, telling her daughter how much she admired, how she had overcome things, and how happy she was with the person she had become. And we all said to her, well, are you going to give it to her now? And she said, well, I really intended her to get it after I died. And we said, well, I think she'd appreciate it now. And so she did, and her daughter did. So describe the trait or achievement and what you've observed in detail and with examples. Say why you think this trait or achievement merits admiration and recognition. Say how it makes you feel to know them and wish them well in the future. And, that's just a basic outline. You do what you want. You're writing from the heart. You can't go wrong. You're saying what you want to say. You're saying what you want people to know. You're thinking about how you want to be remembered. And that's it. If anybody has questions or whatever, you can email me or you can ask them now or you can put them in the chat, whatever. I will attempt to answer them. But my message is just do it. Start writing. Dear somebody, thank you.
Thank you so much, Esther. I love that. I started thinking about this and we started planning this session. My mother-in-law passed a few years back, and I have a son who's 10 years old, and she went through and wrote letters to him for all of the landmark things in his life. And so for the rest of his life, for when he gets married and when he has his first child, there's going to be a letter from my mother-in-law from Linda.
That's great. That's a wonderful example.
Yeah, it's just we even get a little bit jealous because we don't have any more letters or any more messages from beyond, but we appreciate the fact that he is going to have that. He was 3 when she passed, and so to have that voice and to have that guidance, I think is just
that's wonderful.
So important.
Thank you for that.
Anyone have any questions? Again, you can take yourself off chats or off mute, I should say, or put them in the chat. We'll also have a couple moments after we get done with our last presenter. All right, thank you, Esther. And I'm gonna move over now to my colleague, Jess Langer.
All right, thank you, Brenda. And I just wanna make sure we can see the screen. All right. Well, so as Brenda mentioned in my bio earlier, my name is Jess Langer, and I'm an outreach and advocacy specialist with the Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging. And I am someone who loves to collage. I love to photograph everything. I actually have over 30,000 photos in my camera roll on my phone because I am someone who just loves to remember the details. And I have collections of most of the birthday cards anyone has ever given me. I keep ticket stubs, notes my mom left in my lunchbox, wristbands from music festivals, and other various mementos just from throughout my life. And I am someone who loves context and details of a story. And so I tell you all of that because for my section, we're going to be talking about ways to tell our stories and create a family legacy using all of these little bits and pieces and the stories from our lives. And I feel like Nicole and Esther really set me up well to be able to share about this. So we'll be talking about kind of 2 lanes along creating a family legacy. We'll talk about family storybooks and scrapbooking. And so just a little bit of background about scrapbooking for me. I have been scrapbooking since I was young. and I have some really fond memories of visiting my aunt with my sister, where we would work on our scrapbooks and we would create cards to share with our parents or our friends. And she had all of the fun materials that you could really get creative with. So she had photo corners, paper punches, colored and patterned paper, so many stickers, markers, metallic markers, colored pens. So you could really be as creative as you wanted. And I just remember having so much fun looking at her photos while she was creating her own scrapbook next to me creating mine, and hearing the stories behind her photos. And we would even get together with her friends to have a scrapbook party. And so I would be hearing everyone's stories. We'd all be sharing them. Um, and I think it's just a really great activity to do with family, to do intergenerationally. It's a good way to share stories and to put them together visually. So I want to start us out today by asking the question in general, what stories do you want to remember or pass on? And like I mentioned, Nicole and Esther really gave me a great setup. We got you thinking about the legacy letters. Who are you thankful for? Um, what are the things that you want to remember from throughout your life? And so there's a couple ways that we can put these memories in writing and we can pass on these stories. And we'll start out first with family storybooks. Um, you can do this with family, you can do this individually, but storybooks are a way that you can pass on everyday moments, family traditions, and experiences that made you who you are. And they capture family history, to help you share your family legacy. So there are a few options for this. They have guided journals available, grandma's story. I just bought my aunt one for Christmas that I think it was titled Aunt, Tell Me Your Story. And they've got all the prompts already in the book, and they go through, some of them go through, different life stages. They start out in childhood, asking questions about that, through school, young adulthood, midlife, and then maybe some more life review questions towards the end. And you can do this, the individual can do this on their own. I think it's something that could get easily lost in the hustle and bustle of life. And so checking in with folks, if you do decide to go that route, maybe making it into a way to check in with them, could be really impactful for both of you. So I haven't done this yet, but I am inspired to after thinking about it more deeply, but having it be a point of check-in. So reminding her, I gave you this book for Christmas and I'd really like to hear your stories and I'd really like you to put them in writing. So maybe pick one for this week. And then once you fill it out, we can set up a time to chat, maybe on Sundays or something, and you can tell me your story or read it to me. Um, so that's one option, is a guided journal. Another is a digital or shared project book. There are a couple options that I found online, for these project books. So one of them, it's called Storyworth. So you can choose what questions to ask folks, and then the company sends the prompt weekly to the individual, to your loved one. And the individual can either complete the prompt by email, they can just reply to the email that they get, they can record their voice over the phone, or they can write directly in the website. And what they wrote gets stored in the company's software until you're ready to use it. Then you can upload some photos and create your own physical storybook to be printed. Story Keeper was another option that I found, and you can have loved ones record stories by video or voice, and then they turn your recordings into written stories. You can edit those, add some photos, and print that into a physical book as well. But because your loved ones are recording their stories by video or voice, they have the option of including a QR code, in the book. So when you scan that QR code in the physical book, it'll bring you to the video or the voice recording so you can listen or watch it again anytime. So that's a cool option. And then the last two, there are lists of questions on the internet. You could create your own list of questions. You could create fill in the blanks, um, just to ask your family. And this could be something fun you do at holidays, just as a way to reminisce. I think it's important to write these things down. I think we you can share it orally and have, a legacy shared through an oral tradition. But I think it's helpful if you maybe do both. But up to you. And we'll talk about some questions you might ask in a couple slides. So the other option, so we've talked about, written, how you might share it written or orally or verbally. And then this is more of your visual option, so scrapbooking. And a scrapbook can be as simple or as complex and creative and intricate as you want. It's unique to each person, your life story. You might even have multiple for maybe each life stage, each period of your life, each milestone. And so we'll start out by talking about what materials to gather, and I'll give you some notes along the way, and then we'll talk about some specifics on the next slide. So obviously for a scrapbook, one of the most important parts are the photos. And if you haven't already, you might start by sorting your photos. I know it's maybe not as common these days to get our photos printed as often. So maybe that's even where you start is just printing photos. But if you're doing this with an older loved one, they might have more photos than I probably do that are printed. So sorting them, you could sort by year, by person, stage of life, sort by a life event, a wedding or graduation or another theme. And then that helps when you are creating a page or a book around a specific theme or topic. Of course, you'll need your scrapbook album. There are many different options and sizes. Um, of course, scissors, adhesives. Something to note here with adhesives, pens, markers, and paper. It's really important to find acid-free options because acid can erode and degrade, photos and paper. So they make acid-free paper that's designed to last for decades and that won't affect the quality of your photos. They make photo-safe glue sticks. You could use double stick tape. You could use glue dots, photo corners. Um, if you're using, like an original kind of heritage photograph that there's only one copy, um, it is a good idea to attach them with photo corners rather than glue or other adhesives in case you need to remove them to make an additional copy. And a note on, scissors or a paper cutter, if you're cropping photos, just be aware that cropping can also cause crumbling edges. It could crack emulsion in older, kind of fragile photos. So you might want to make a copy if you only have one photo, if that's an original. Um, and then acid-free pens, that's really to avoid ink bleeding into photos, especially if it's an original. You really want to be careful about that. And then you can gather anything else, stickers, you might gather some stamps, journal entries, diary entries, recipes, awards, certificates, those small mementos I mentioned earlier, like ticket, stubs, wristbands, other small heirlooms. And you could also take photos of larger kind of heirloom items like a quilt or a wedding dress. And then you could use that in your scrapbook. You could also make it larger and use that as a background page as well. Um, and then for those smaller heirlooms, you can also include pocket pages if you'd like to include those if they're not something that necessarily flattens, but as a way to include them with everything. So Kind of my last slide here, thinking about what stories do you want to remember or pass on. We have all of these different areas of our life, and this is not a complete list, obviously, but we could think about childhood, um, you know, what kind of games did you play growing up? What was your favorite thing to do? Were there any trends, hairstyles? And you can think about all of these different areas from both lenses, from a written or verbal stance and both the visual and photographed sense. So, childhood, you might write about what is your earliest childhood memory. You might write about, what was your favorite dinner? Who made that dinner? Um, you might write about your pets. If you're thinking about it visually, you might include photos of those pets. You might include photos of, you know, if there are any of family dinner or the potlucks, the family reunions, birthdays, thinking about everyday moments. There's lots of things that we could write about just to share about the more mundane but equally important moments of our lives. What was your routine like at this stage of life? You can talk about the train or the same bus route and what you saw on that bus route. You might um, share photos. Like I mentioned earlier, I have so many photos of details. And so I have photos of the way the light reflects on the wall or, really close up photos of like my dog's paws or something. And so um, all of those stories you can share in those different ways. And just encourage you to get creative about how you're telling that story, what you're including to tell that story. um, Recipes, it might be an actual written recipe card from your mom or your grandma that you include in the scrapbook. Maybe there's a photo of that meal or that cake. My grandma used to make never fail cake. And so we have a recipe that's written in her handwriting, so I could include that. I think we likely have photos of it. She would make it for our October outings or for birthdays, so we could include photos of those events. And also important to journal in the scrapbook too and be detailed. So Grandma Dar's never fail cake recipe. If you have context about when she created this recipe, include that. When did it come out? How did people feel when they ate it? All of those types of things. And I know I'm over time, so I will wrap it up here and just say thank you um, and honor my ancestors, my grandma and grandpa here with this photo.
That's lovely. Thank you so much, Jess. Thank you. Thank you all so much for what a rich conversation about stories and values and things we've learned that really shape who we are. Before we wrap up, I want to make sure that everyone knows about our remaining Get Your Ducks in a Row webinars this week, all free and all from 10 to 11 a.m. We have one tomorrow with a death doula on understanding the dying process. And then on Friday, we'll be wrapping up our week with a mindful path to peace through purposeful decluttering. So a really thought-provoking session as well. And so you can find information about all of our upcoming in-person workshops and other things and recordings at ducksinarowmn.org. To our presenters today, thank you so much for reminding us about that the most meaningful things that we leave behind sometimes aren't things at all. Whether it's the stories, the values, the connections that we nurture are what truly endure. And you've given our attendees both some inspiration and some tools to start capturing those things. And to everyone who joined us today, thank you. We hope you leave feeling both moved and motivated, whether it is starting to think about how we might incorporate life review to look at where we are and where we're going, whether it's writing a legacy letter, whether it's sitting down with a grandparent or finally getting those family stories recorded. We hope today was the spark that you needed. Today's recording will be available on our YouTube channel in the coming days, and we'll send a link out to all registrants. You can also find us at arrowheadaging.org. Before we wrap up, I'll check and see don't have any questions in the chat. If you do think about something after the fact, if you're like me, feel free to send those questions to us via email and we'll get you some responses. Otherwise, I'd love to just say thank you guys and have a wonderful Wednesday. And everyone take care. Thanks.